Good evening, everyone. This is Kim Adams with another episode of Vital Conversations, Dialogues on Living and Dying Well. Welcome back as we start our fall series. I took the month of August off. It's always a hard time with vacations and things. And so, gave myself and others a little bit of a break. But here we are, jumping back into the fall season. Hard to believe we are in the middle of September already. We have a great lineup for the fall. And so I'm looking forward to having you join us, not only tonight, so thank you. If you're new, welcome. And if you've been to some of these webinars before, welcome back. So before we get started with our wonderful guest tonight, let me just do a couple of things. First of all, let me just introduce myself again. My name is Kim Adams, and I am an end-of-life educator. And this forum here with these webinars is one way that I share information with you, options. In addition, some of you have heard of Deaf Cafes. I'll be starting one of those here. I'm currently on a virtual Deaf Cafe, so that's an interesting experience. So just finding opportunities to bring death and dying and living well is part of our title, into this community and various forums. In addition, I work with people and my clients around end-of-life planning. So really, whatever that means in terms of living well now, whether you are a baby boomer and age is catching up with you and you say, what does my last chapter look like? Or if you have a life-limiting illness and time is not on your side, or if you're really a conscious younger person who says, you know what, it's important to start these conversations now. So I work with clients around that and available for speaking opportunities and conferences and various things like that. So that's just a little bit about me. Wanted to also say before we jump in, let's do a little housekeeping. This is live technology, so we certainly do not foresee any issues at all tonight. But if for some reason your browser, or I should say the audio or the video goes a little wonky, just refresh your browser. 9 times out of 10, that will take care of it. If you're still having problems, I put a little message in the chat function, a little sticky note, because this is being broadcast on YouTube. So you can go to the YouTube channel and be able to see that as well. A number of you that have registered, thank you, have informed me that tonight is one of the presidential debates here in the United States. And so a number of you will be tuning into that, so you'll be watching the replay. So again, the replay will be available to everyone who's registered. So even if you're on with us live tonight, you will also get the replay. So enjoy that. I think that is it for housekeeping. Oh, the chat function. So we have a way for you to engage with us, and that is the chat here on the right-hand side of your screen. So go ahead now and just type in, let us know your name and where you're calling in from, and that will be your way to engage with one another and with us. And we have some opportunities, for you to type in questions, comments, and some questions later that we'll have. So again, welcome. And without further ado, let me introduce our guest speaker, and well, my guest for tonight, our guest. And our guest is Nina Thompson. And Nina is the executive director of the Wake Up to Dying Project and brings 20 years of entrepreneurial and business consulting experience to her role. She's experienced in community organizing, project management, political campaigns, and organizational development. She's worked for large-scale production companies before moving to Vermont, and she co-managed multi-million-dollar breast cancer awareness events in Chicago, New York, LA, and San Francisco. Nina drew her vision for the Wake Up to Dying Project from her hospice work and her Zen meditation practice. So, welcome, Nina.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. It's really exciting to be here. This is my first webinar.
Great. Well, we're so happy to have you. And it looks like we have some folks already chiming into the chat, letting us know. So welcome. We have Jackie from Ontario and Mary from Chicago. They're coming in fast. We have Don from British Columbia, Canada.
Yeah, very cool.
Trish says, hi. Hi, Trish. I know you're here in Massachusetts. And Mike says, looking forward to this. And we are as well. So let's just jump in, Nina, and let's just have you share with us what is the Wake Up to Dying Project?
Okay, so the Wake Up to Dying Project is a nonprofit organization, and our mission is to encourage people to think and to talk about dying. And we're doing this through story and through art and through offering the general public sort of hands-on engagement opportunities to explore the topic. And we really think that if we, with our work, we can help people be more prepared, both practically and emotionally for this shared human experience. But also, I think if we do this work, we can encourage people to pay more attention to the way they live and live better. So really, there's sort of like two things in that mission. There's this help people be more prepared practically and emotionally, but also to get more out of life. And we work really, really hard trying to make sure those two things are balanced. And the primary way we're doing this really is by collecting and sharing first-person audio stories about death, dying, and life. And right now we probably have over 100 of those on our website, all sorts of different stories from different perspectives and different people. And we also are sharing them in a traveling exhibit. And this is sort of the exciting thing that's happening right now. We're having our first full year of traveling exhibit. We've done 2 so far, and we're about to do a 3rd in your neck of the woods in Somerville, Mass. So that's, in the nutshell, what the Wake Up to Dying Project is.
Great. And we are very excited, and we'll get into more a little bit later about what the traveling exhibit is and what it entails. But I know we're strongly encouraging people to come out and to support it. So,
absolutely.
So how did you get into this?
So that is a longer story. That's it's been like a 10-year process, but I can I'll start with the sort of the kickoff experience that I think got me started in this idea of wanting to engage community and end of life discussions and such. And so my dad died about 10 years ago, and I went to Minnesota where he died, and I declared to my family, and my grandmother was alive at the time, and my brother and my aunt and uncle, and everyone was around, and I sort of declared that I was going to build a box for his ashes. I'm going to build a box for his ashes. And they were like, oh, don't be ridiculous. And I was like, no, really, I want to build a box for his ashes. And my grandmother said, just Nina, I will pay for it. You go get it. Go to the funeral home. That's what funeral homes do. Go pick one out and I'll pay for it. And I was like, no, listen, I'm a lesbian from Vermont, and this is what we do. We build things. So I decided that that was sort of the end of the conversation. And then I went home and I back to Vermont and had to figure out how to do that. And I didn't know how to build something. I didn't have tools. So I had to kind of poke around in my community. And I found this guy who was willing to help me do it. And it was this incredible experience of sort of, it's very contemplative. And he would sort of show me how to do this all in silence. And he had this beautiful farm in Vermont. And he would show me how to do it, like put his hand on mine and show me how to use a piece of equipment. And then I would go outside and cry, and I would come back in, and he would have been kept it going. And he sort of showed me where we were. And then it just went back and forth like that for about 45 minutes. And I realized at the end of this process that this man was just, he was engaged with this as much as I was, and this beautiful experience between us. And then I actually took that box to another friend's house, and he said, I showed it to him. I'm like, what do you think? I just built this for my dad. And he said, I think it needs some sanding. So I was like, okay, let's sand it. So again, the same thing happened. We sat there in this quiet space for about 45 minutes and just experienced some depth that was unspoken. And about halfway through, I looked at him and I could tell he was grieving. And he didn't know my dad, so it wasn't about my dad. And I remembered it was that his dad he died when he was 9. So there's no way this guy got to build a box for his dad, or to even really probably be told right away, I think. So it just dawned on me that we have been so removed from end of life, and we're missing something by not being engaged in it. We don't get to grieve, I think, in a way, and we don't get to connect with community in a way. So that kind of was a start for me to go, what can I do to bring community back to death and dying? It was like I got sort of driven, and it became a mission. And I actually tried to start about 3 different companies that would and do that, bring community back to death and dying. And one was like a green burial cemetery, but that was 10 years ago, and they weren't really happening then. And then I thought a cooperative funeral home, and then I thought I wanted to create a hospice house right in my own town. I thought that would be really cool. But none of those ideas actually worked out. They were challenging, but there were 2 themes in there that, I think are really present in Wake Up to Dying. And one theme is bringing community back to death and dying. It's a strong theme. And then the other idea was that there should be audio story. And every one of those business ideas that I had, there was audio story. At the cemetery, it was like GPS coordinate. You could push a button and there was story. In the cooperative funeral home, there was an audio library. And in the hospice, the idea was that in the chapel, you could go in and push a button and hear a hospice volunteer talking about their experience, or a patient who was dying talking about their experience. So even though none of those business ideas worked out, those themes kept sticking with me. And I ended up telling a person I met at a cocktail party, actually, these ideas. And she's like, oh, I'm actually an audio producer, and I just interviewed my friend over the last 3 months who was dying. And I was like, oh. And we just kind of looked at each other and like, I think we have a conversation to have. And yeah. And then, one other thing just to share here, during this time, I was a hospice volunteer, and I was taking a class in Foundations and Contemplative Caregiving, which is a program, like a prerequisite for a chaplaincy program that I was interested in. So I was seeing a lot of people at end of life, and a lot of families. And I started to notice all the different ways that people respond to it, both the people who are dying and their families. And like 87-year-olds kind of surprised that they were dying, and people that were totally engaging in their families and having incredible and intimate moments, and other people who wouldn't even walk in the door because they were so thrown by their, recognizing their own mortality there. They were so afraid. So I just started to wonder what would happen if we as a society paid attention to death and dying before it was blindsiding us. And that became it turned into the question, what would happen if we paid more attention to the fact that we die, which is sort of a mantra for me. And it's the question that Wake Up to Dying became the exploration, the vehicle to explore, I should say. So that's sort of our driving question. And usually I like to ask people what they think about that question. So I could ask you, what do you think would happen if we paid more attention to the fact that we die?
Great. Well, let's get some dialogue going too in the chat. So type in, what do you think? If we paid more attention to dying, how would we live differently?
What would happen?
Yeah. What would happen?
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah. So for me, my partner tells me I'm much easier to live with now that I think about it. I think because I don't sweat the small stuff as much, and and my compassion for people is much stronger. I think I see everyone sort of as people who will die, and it makes me just love them more and want to be kinder. So what about you?
Yeah. That's a really great question. I think, don't sweat the small stuff is huge for me as well. And I think just being more present just with whatever is happening in the moment, so not racing ahead into the future and not really dwelling on what's already happened, but really just, focused on the here and now and what's important now, I think is a big piece for me. That would be different. Yeah.
So if your listeners or people who are viewing, if they want to tell us what they think, what do you all out there think would happen if we paid more attention to the fact that we die? We sometimes put this question up at our events and see what people say. And, some people say they would change their jobs. They would spend less time at work, more time at home. That kind of thing. Somebody wrote here, we would live better, more grateful, more alive. I totally agree, Trish. That's totally true. I agree.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's amazing that, if we pay more attention to something that's a part of our life, right? We want to tend to segment and say, okay, we're born, we have our life, and then we die. Really, it's one big continuum. So, being able to have these opportunities, and I love, as you're speaking about, kind of this public awareness of,
Yep.
yeah, let's talk about
Yeah.
a natural, normal part of the life cycle. And so to say, to pose that question, what would be, what would happen if we paid more attention? I love it.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
like I said, it's the question that keeps me going. It gets me out of bed every morning to keep going with this startup. It's really, we really are a nonprofit startup. Last year was the very first year that we played with the traveling exhibit idea. And we only incorporated about 2.5 years ago. So, but last year I had this idea that we have all these stories. We started collecting all these stories, and we have stories from chaplains and from people who are dying and people who are grieving and people who are just really curious about what death and dying and all that is all about, and people who are talking about living better. And all those, like I said, are on my website or our website. But I also had I kept having this idea that we needed to put this tent or a traveling exhibit right in the middle of a downtown, like right in a grassy area where people would walk by for 4 days in a row. We thought the longer we were there, the better, because, at the first person's going to walk by, or the first time you walk by our site and see these tents and this sign that says the Wake Up to Dying Project, you're going to be like, what the hell is that? And you might even be offended. I mean, if you've lost somebody recently, you're grieving and you don't need somebody to tell you to wake up to dying. But we thought that if we were there for several days, people, would come by the next day and then the next day and see us still there and find their way in. So anyway, last year was the very first year, and I was lamenting to a friend that I don't know how to show this to people. I said, I wish I just had a tent, and he actually had one. So he's like, oh, I have one you can borrow. So I said, great. And then I realized, oh God, I have to do this now. So I took this tent and I took all my lawn furniture, and I rented some speakers, and I took our audio stories, and I just set it up in a field in the middle of the Northeast Kingdom in Vermont, which is the middle of nowhere. And it was during the spring fling. And I was right in between this tent. We put up this tent right in between the jumpy house and the fried dough. And we were there for like 5 hours, and it rained for 3 of them, and 25 people came. And actually, it was really incredible. It was like people walk to the tent and would walk away, come back and look in again, walk away, come back a third time. This man and his daughter, he was a young man, and his 13-year-old daughter did just that. They looked in, walked away, came back, kind of stepped inside of the tent, looked at some of the resources we had, and then they walked away. And then they came back again, and they sat down and they listened to a bunch of stories and then shared theirs with me. And so I was really encouraged. Even though it was 25 people, I was encouraged. And the next thing that we did was we set it up in Montpelier, Vermont, which is where I live. And 550 people came. So it was incredible. And so it was like, okay, we're on to something. So we got to do this. And this year, like I've said, we've done 2 events, and we're about to do a third, and well over 700 people came to our last event, 500 something before that. And so we've, the 2 years we've been active, we've had a couple thousand people participating in our exhibits.
Nice.
Pretty cool.
That's phenomenal. And I love what you speak about, Nina, with the 2 kind of principles, or the 2 pieces around bringing back community around death and dying, and the story. So talk to us a little bit about, why are the stories, why do they seem to work? Or what's so important about stories? Talk a little bit about why they're so powerful.
Yep. Well, I think stories help us ease into topics, especially topics that we might find challenging, like death and dying, or topics that really scare us. I think, we want to learn from other people. I'll speak for myself. I'm not a big fan of just getting straight out advice. Just don't tell me what to do. Tell me. Right. So, I think a friend of mine told me once about how he had to change a tire on the side of the road, and then and that it was really difficult, and he had to like jump on the bar to get the lug nut off, and then I ended up having a flat tire and couldn't get a lug nut off, and then I remember that he had told me you can jump on the bar, so I jumped on the bar and that worked. But it's the same thing with death and dying. So we have stories. For example, a nurse talks about how when we're dying, that we tend to turn inward and turn away. And I think that's really important advice for somebody who's witnessing a death and might feel that the person is ignoring them or pulling away from them, to know that is what happens, and to not take it personally. And that's something that you might hear from a story, or you might hear a story about grieving and know that this person might talk about it like a roller coaster, and you may have no experience with grieving yet that felt like a roller coaster, but maybe a month from now, or 6 months from now, or 2 years from now, you'll be, somebody's died and you're grieving, and you'll feel that thing that feels like a roller coaster, and you'll remember and you'll feel comforted. I think that's one of the things about stories, is that you can pick up something now that resonates, and then there's still all these pearls of wisdom that might be able to help you down the road when it's necessary. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we take it in, seeds are planted, and then all of a sudden at some point, yeah, like you said, with the even, it's not around death and dying, but kind of the, changing the tire. It's like, oh yeah, I can jump on the whatever that thing is to get the lug nuts off.
Right.
So as opposed to being told. So yeah. So I think you have a couple of stories you want to share.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Couple of stories so people can actually hear real life stuff.
Yeah. So let me just say, so sort of how we collect stories is we do these really long format interviews. We might interview somebody for an hour, hour and a half, sometimes even 2 hours. But then we edit out little excerpts. So they're a minute, 2 minutes long. So that's what's up on our website, is a bunch of those 2 minutes, 1 minute, 40 seconds to 4 minutes might be. So again, they're really beautiful. So I have a few different stories here. Let me share this story. It's called The Knitting Story. It takes me a little bit to find it on my phone here. And I will say that this story, so as I was mentioning, I was in this like pre-chaplaincy program. And so I had to do a lot of hours of chaplaining, and I was brand new, and I'm in the hospital, and I go into like the hospice room, and I see like just 2 people in there, and I'm like, oh, I can handle that. I can handle like 2 people. And then I walked in, and there was like 14 people like on the other side of the room that I couldn't see. And they walked in, and it was like this big group of people, and they're like, oh, you're here to give us a prayer. And I was like, oh, I was like total stage fright. It was literally the first time I was going to have to do that. And I said, well, sure, I can do that, but can you guys tell me about Susie, whoever it was in the room? And they said, sure. But it actually, unfortunately, one of the people in the room was pretty angry at the person that was dying and started to say some harsher words. And then, and I could tell that the daughters were feeling a little uncomfortable. And then I remembered this story, and it bailed me out. And I'll tell you why after I play it. Here we go. It's called The Knitting Story.
Okay.
One of my very first patients in a hospital setting, who was a farmer down in south of here, and she was dying of lung cancer. She'd never been to a doctor until a few days before she came into the hospital and was diagnosed with a terminal cancer. I doubt many of the family had ever been in the doctor, and certainly being in the hospital was a very alien setting for them. So they were all not themselves because they were not comfortable being in this environment. I went in and I started to do like a typical intake, and this was one of my very first patients. And she finally, after I asked her like a dozen questions about things, she propped herself up in bed and said, she had no teeth and piercing blue eyes, and said, "Will you stop asking so many stupid questions? I'm dying." And I thought, oh my God, what am I doing? So next day I go back, and I hold her back of her hand, and we're sort of chatting quietly. And I finally, searching for some way to connect, I said to the patient's children and grandchildren, tell me some things that your mom really liked to do, because she was at that point, it was difficult for her to talk. And they started talking about what a great knitter she was. And I ended up inviting them to each go around the room and talk about what she had knit for them that they would always treasure. And it was an incredible moment. And when I went back the next day, the room was festooned with all of these knitting projects. So it was like they achieved what I would call a final conversation, even though very, very few words were exchanged.
Wow.
Yeah. So in that room, I when I was feeling like it was going in a direction that the kids didn't really want to hear it go in, I asked if she had any hobbies or anything that she did while she that she really got a lot of joy out of, and they said quilting, and I was like, oh, perfect. Has she quilted things for you guys? And then the next thing you know, we're going around that whole room, and all those people are talking about the things that she had quilted, and that the idea was to bring in a quilt because they could put it on her, and they were discussing which one. So that, that's one of the things about stories too, is those of us that are doing caregiving can actually get some new ideas from each other's stories. So I always encourage people in the business to listen to our stories too and share them, and share their stories. So
yeah.
So
Wow, I definitely can see the power in that, to really hear that. And you're right. I mean, now it's like, wow, I'm sure we have some caregivers and some folks in, the professional realm, and just family members too, that really could take some of these things and say, wow, it's important, because we can pull it out of the heaviness and the, oh my gosh, to, wow, what a beautiful question, what are some hobbies? And then all of a sudden, boom, it got a discussion going that may or may not would have occurred. So I think that's great. That's great.
Yeah.
We're having some dialogue here in the chat.
Sure.
I'm loving this. People are chiming in, or they have chimed in, about what would happen if we paid more attention to the fact that we die. And so just to go over some of the things here, these are some great, as Trish said, we'll live better, more grateful. Mike said he'd quit his job after a coworker had a stroke from stress. Yeah, I mean, stress,
wow,
number one thing. Less compartmentalized ways of grieving loss, says Mary. Gina says, start writing my memoir now. And I know, Gina, that you've shared in here that you are currently on home hospice now with a terminal illness. So, know that our thoughts and prayers are with you here. But you start to write a weekly update through all your treatment, and shared your thoughts about death and dying with your family and friends. How beautiful. They told me that they were learning from me. You couldn't be a better teacher. Wow.
Absolutely.
Wow. And Gina says, living more in the present, non-attached, and letting go of control. Well, that's a big one, huh, Nina?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Catherine, I love what you say. Would allow for more meaningful conversations, which in turn will reduce people's anxiety at the time of dying. Great.
Absolutely.
And this is, as we're talking
really
about,
critical.
This is another vehicle, right? This is another vehicle here that Nina is, creating here, and is really this awareness and action campaign based around community, based around stories. So love it.
Yeah. And I love hearing stories about people gleaning lessons from what we've shared. So, or, what we're sharing right here, right now. It's like, let your family learn from me during this time. There's no better teacher than you right now. And that's Gina, right? Yeah. No better teacher right now.
Yes.
That's beautiful.
Nice.
And death teaches us a lot. And I have one story that I'll share. If you want to hear another one. And
sure, absolutely.
Did that sound okay? I couldn't tell on my end.
That sounded great. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no, it sounded really good.
So this is a story about a woman who lost her husband, and sort of reflecting on it. This is what she's learned, and it definitely speaks to our message. So it's called "The Point Is to Love."
I realize I look at people and I look at their relationships and I want to say to them, you don't have each other forever. You don't have each other forever. It won't go on forever. Wake up and pay attention to each other. Pay attention to the details. It's also changed the way I treat people and the way I interact with people. It makes me very aware of when I have been judgmental in the past and that I don't want to be that way. My feeling now is that, wait a minute, we're on this planet for one reason and one reason only, and that's to love. And if you can't love somebody, then at least be kind. And it just has changed the way I relate to people. And in that change, I have also seen people notice that change. They reflect it back to me, which makes me feel wonderful, because I feel the love. It's an ongoing process. I don't say that I've arrived anywhere. I'm on my way. I'm not sure where.
Definitely a journey, right?
Yeah. So,
nice.
That's the great lesson. So one of the things about being an awareness campaign, so that woman, she had this awakening after her husband died about the point is to love, don't miss the moments, don't sweat the small stuff, that whole being present with each other and loving each other. But, we're human and time goes on and time passes and we forget, we get totally sucked into our work and we get sucked into how much we hate our commute. And we forget to say, I love you before we leave the house. And that's, that's why we want to be an awareness campaign. That's why we hope to have, if we come into a community, we want to be on the radio, we want to have ads, we want to have this event in the middle of town, we want to have these stories on our website, because we just want to be this kind, respectful reminder now and then that, we all are going to die. We don't know when or how, but we all will. So given that, how do you want to live? So that's sort of the awareness campaign part, just to be a kind reminder here and there.
Sure. Well,
and also just, we're so, I was going to say, we're just so afraid. Many of us, not everybody, many of us are really afraid of what death and dying looks like, because we don't know. We walk into that room and we don't know what to expect. So that's another way that sharing these stories is so important. If somebody's telling a story about, there's this raspy, deep gurgling sound that comes out when somebody's dying. If I hear that now, and I had no idea that existed, when it happens to a loved one of mine, I won't panic as much. I won't, it'll be something I knew was coming. And so that's another important reason for the story.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I heard the other day, it's like, we're all amateurs at this, right? No one's an expert in dying. So being able to have opportunities to really learn, and so that we can reduce the fear. I used to say that people were really afraid of death and talking about death and dying. And actually, I think people are afraid of the dying process, but people are so eager to talk about death and dying. But a lot of times our culture, our society has said, no, you don't deal with that. You don't talk about it. But so providing these forums and providing opportunities and providing something like the traveling exhibit that you are bringing to Massachusetts next weekend is a wonderful, safe opportunity for people to kind of put their toe in the water, so to speak, right? To really just
absolutely
begin to engage in that in a safe way. And I love how you talked about up in Vermont, people walk by, then they come back and maybe they'll go into the tent or whatever. So, is this a good time? You want to share a little bit about kind of what the traveling exhibit entails?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are going to be in Somerville, Massachusetts, in Davis Square, and we'll be set up in a little park in downtown there, right on the bike path. And so if you were walking down that bike path, what you would see is a bunch of tents set up. And one of the tents is this big tent, and that is the listening tent. And that's where we play our audio stories. So these stories, some of the ones that you've heard here, are woven together in about a 90-minute loop. There's 50 different stories on the loop, and there's musical interludes and nature sound sort of transition. So, and that just goes all day long, and there's chairs and tables and some things to doodle with. And, you know, that's just set up from about 10 or 11 in the morning till 6 at night. And it just goes. So it's this contemplative space, and that's the listening area. And then there's another tent, and that is the resource tent. And so what we do is we go into a community months and months and months in advance, and we start to find community partners that want to work with us. In Massachusetts, we're working with the Children's Room, and which is a bereavement center for kids and teens, and a local hospice, All Care Hospice is one of our sponsors, and Mount Auburn Cemetery is a community partner, and then also Massachusetts Health Decisions. We have 4. But the other thing we gather all these other resources from community organizations, or resources about advanced directives or grieving groups in the area, or green burial, funeral consumers type stuff, lawyer materials about wills and trusts, and put all those things in a resource tent. So that's the other tent on site. And then we actually have replicated that Before I Die chalkboard. Before I Die, the thing Candy Chang made, that's the artist from New Orleans. She created that chalkboard, and we've made one that's 20 feet long and 8 feet tall, and that's set up in the middle of the field too. So if you come to this site, you see that there's all these different entry points, places that you can wade in, simple entries like, what do I want to do before I die? I want to learn to speak French. Or things that are a little bit more difficult, like, you know, going in and perusing end-of-life service materials, and thinking about doing your advanced directive, or even thinking about how you might plan your funeral might be a little more complicated for people. And then there's the listening tent that is like, you know, there's stories that are going to make you cry in there. There's stories that are going to make you laugh. We have good, funny stories in there too. But that's a little bit more of an advanced class for some people. So by design, we try to create all these entry points that are varied, so people can find their own way in to exploring what death and dying and life mean to them. And that's, you know, critical to us, to the way we want to do this. We want this really open-handed offering in the space that is attractive, and it's sort of it's pretty laid back, actually. It's a pretty chill space. You know, we have a lot of volunteers working with us, about 95 different volunteer shifts that we fill. And we ask the volunteers, you know, the only question we ask them to ask of people is, what do you think? That's pretty much all you need to ask. You know, so people really come and explore this for themselves. And so that's the exhibit itself. But the other thing that's happening is we have a bunch of workshops that are going on. We have 4 or 5 different workshops happening, and we do community dialogues every day. And the community dialogue is sort of like the Death Cafe model, you know, just come in, talk about whatever's on your mind, and we get a brown bag lunch sort of dialogue going. But I can share some of the workshops, because it is, let me see, get my paper over here. It is kind of another example of how we try to keep some balance. You know, we always want people thinking about practical sort of ways of being more prepared for death and dying, for the shared human experience. But we also want to encourage people to think a little more about living well. So we have workshops that sort of balance that out. For example, we have spiritual perspectives on death, dying, and life workshop. And we have a It's Your Funeral, Do It Your Way workshop. And we have Living Well, Dying Well, Death and Documents, The Business of Dying. That's the one you're going to be on. Death and Documents, The Business of Dying. And we're exploring advanced directives and legal documents in that one. And then there's the end of life planning sort of Q&A, which is this open time to just come talk to people like you and lawyers about wills and trusts and stuff. And then again, the last one we have is Living Well, Dying Well. And that one we invite panelists that are hospice nurses or doctors, and you know, hospice volunteers and palliative care people to tell us what they have come to learn by working in this field. Like, how do they want to live differently? How do they want to die differently? And then both individually as individuals, but also again, as in community, because community again is such an important piece for us. So, and they're all local panelists that we bring. We really want to make sure we have local people on those panels. We want to invite local people to facilitate. You know, I certainly could facilitate them, but to me, it's so much more important to have local people in all of those roles. All those volunteers are local. The whole goal is to create this stage where we turn community towards itself so that we can learn how to have these kinds of conversations out loud. And, you know, it's miraculous, the things that happen in this space. During one of our spiritual perspectives workshop, a woman was having a rough time. She said to the panel that her partner had killed herself a year ago. She was really concerned about how that had affected her soul. And this is the spiritual perspectives workshop. So there's spiritual people on the panel, and her dad was in hospice, and there was something else that was going on. I can't remember the third thing, but during the middle of our event, she actually got a phone call that her father died while she was there during that panel.
Wow.
It was an incredible moment. I mean, it was like we just sort of sprang into action and had a moment of silence for her, but crazy things happen. And also just really perfectly normal and beautiful things, like a guy walks by and looks at the "Before I Die" chalkboard and says, "Before I die, I want to." And then he walked away. He's like, "I'm going to have to think about that." And he starts walking down the sidewalk. And about 10 feet later, he turns around and he looks at me. He's like, "You know what's great about that?" I said, "What?" He's like, "I'm going to think about that." So I was like, exactly. That's fantastic. That's right. So just little tiny, we're planting so many seeds in these events. Hundreds of people, even people who don't stop and that don't get counted, they're walking by and seeing the Wake Up to Dying project. And even in just one moment, we can encourage them to just consider the truth of the fact that they die, and to see that, maybe they could live a little bit differently or be more prepared for that. Yeah, it's great. Yeah, there's really amazing things happen. Oh, yeah, Advanced Directive, you'll like this. There was a woman after one of the events. I was at a little gathering, and I had no idea who this woman was. And she was saying something like, "Did you see that Wake Up to Dying thing that was in town, that event that was in town?" And I just kind of played dumb. I'm like, "Oh yeah, I saw that. Did you go to it?" She said, "Yeah." And she's like, "It was great." And then I went right home and I did my advanced directives, and I got my will and trust done. I got everything done. They had been sitting on my desk for 3 years, and I went right home and did that. And I was like, "Oh, that's really good to hear. I'm the executive director." Thank you for saying something.
That's so great.
Yeah.
What I so love is that, number one, there's so many entry points, right? And there's just such a variety of ways that you reach out and touch. And as you said, you plant seeds, even an awareness of, wow, that guy who was like, wow, I'm going to go home and think about that. So, I want to share, those of you, my friends here in Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, even Connecticut, it's not that far. If you want more of this, if you want to experience this, come to Somerville. It starts next Thursday, September 24th, and goes Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. As Nina mentioned, I will be one of the volunteers on Saturday, and in addition, I'll be on that panel on the death and documents talking about advanced care directives and part of the Q&A. So come by. If you're new, come by, say hello. You get to meet Nina as well. So really encourage people to. This is a safe space to come and just begin to explore. Nina, I'm curious. Are there things for kids?
It didn't work out that way in this event, but we did in our last event. We had a creative exploration of death and dying for kids and families in Burlington, Vermont. In that, but we're working with the children's room, so there'll be materials. There's books in our library. We do have a library in our resource tent, so there's some books in there you can sit down and grab a book and read it to a kid. And there's a bibliography of all the kids' books that you can take with you. But no, there's not actually a workshop this time. But next year, we got started a little bit late in Massachusetts this year. But next year we will definitely have a kid thing happening.
Great.
And that's the idea, to be able to to keep growing this organization. Like I said, last year was the first year we experimented, and this year we're doing 3 events, and they're pretty intense. It's 4-day events. I'm a limited staff. I have me and a couple part-time people, and we're trying to grow this thing. And I can tell you that it's working, and we're starting to get attention, but really to be able to scale this up and to affect more people, to bring the traveling exhibit to more communities. We need some more funding. We're looking for foundations that might want to support us and create long-term relationships with us. And we're finding some, and we'll need more, and to really create a strategy for growth over the next 4 years that, so we can be like the AIDS blanket, like, oh, Wake Up to Dying is coming to town.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I want to go. And also to do a lot more with our stories. We pay audio producers and editors and transcription people. So they're expensive to make those stories. And I need a lot more. I really want a lot more stories up there. I think we can do podcasts. We can do all sorts of things if we can grow funding and staff. So that's the goal. That's the plan.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, certainly, in the last 2 years, you've done last year a tremendous amount to be able to pull together these events. Now, Trish had a great question. Do you collect stories at the events?
No, we don't. We don't do that because we do hire professionals to do, like I said, long-term interviews, and that's sort of expensive and labor intensive right now. But someday I would absolutely want to be collecting them on site. I think that would be critical. And the other thing is we create this sort of matrix of story, and believe it or not everyone's a great storyteller. So we have to be thoughtful about the interviews too. All the stories are incredibly valuable. I'd like to create somehow a platform on our website where even more stories can be shared than the ones we professionally produce. I just don't know what that looks like yet, but that would be the goal.
Nice. Yeah.
Blogs. I do, anyone out there is interested in writing. I'm not a writer. And I'm wondering about bringing in guest writers for a blog on our website or something like that. So if anyone has any interest in writing something that might be fitting for our website, I'd love to hear from you. And I'm at Nina at wakeuptodyingproject.org. So
great.
Guest writers are welcome.
Super. You can see Nina's website under her name there. So it's just Nina at wakeuptodyingproject.org. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Elizabeth says, hearing children's voices and the experience would be wonderful. Gina mentions helping kids to deal with death is important. She is an elementary school counselor, and she ran grief groups for children who had lost pets and loved ones. So there's a whole piece around children, and I can see it growing with, but right now you have to be selective in, not growing faster than the revenue and faster than things. So
my capacity. So we do have one kid. We have a young person who's talking about some really beautiful stories on our website by a young woman. She's now 18, telling us the story of when she was 9 when her father died, or even younger, I think. And they're just they're beautiful stories. One of my favorites is called Meeting My Father at His Funeral. And that's on our website. And all of these are on our website. They're categorized by topic. So there's one called Children, there's Memorial and Spiritual Perspectives, I think. And there's reflection and dying and living. And so there are all these different categories that you can check out on our website. And also you can search by partial title. So if it's not exactly called I Met Him at My Funeral, you can look up the word funeral, and a few different ones will come up, and you'll see the one that talks about a kid, a young woman talking about meeting her father, which, somebody recently wrote on our survey. They listened to that story and they said, hearing that story about this young person talking about how important her dad's funeral was to her, because that's where people talked about him and she came to know him. The woman in the survey wrote, I realized how important having a memorial is. I was playing with the idea of not having one. And I realized that it's not, it's something for the living, and that I think I'm gonna reconsider that, was basically the thought. So again, people change their minds. Yeah. So.
Sure. Great. Loving this, you guys. There's some excellent communication in the chat here. Big thing around kids. So that may be something that comes down the line. I wanted to also say, and you,
so go ahead.
Go ahead. No, that there are folks here that are not from the area, and I know Gina had said, I think it was Gina asking about hearing more of the stories, and as Nina said, go to their website, wakeuptodyingproject.org, and, search for the various stories, which are great. I've listened to many of them, so that's a way to do it if you're not local to actually come, in this case, next week to Massachusetts. But
you want me to play one more quick one? This one?
Sure, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'll play one more. It's called Go to the Light. This one is, I love this one. Okay, hold on.
Okay.
One of my friend's brothers was dying of AIDS in the mid 80s. He was one of the earlier people to die, and his parents, who had been divorced years before, remarried other people, had other kids. So there was a large extended family. They didn't even know he was gay. So if they find out their son is gay because he had this disease, so now they find out he's gay and he's dying. I mean, just totally blew them apart. The parents were conventional people from Long Island, New York, and very traditional. His mother was a Long Island housewife. So she got into reading some New Age books to prepare for death and what was happening, and meditations that he had wanted her to read, and it was very foreign for her. And she went through these books, and at the very end, he's in a semi-coma, and most of the family has gathered around his hospital bed, and they're lying there, and she finally comes up to him in all the pain in her heart of her son, and she leans over him in her lovely Long Island accent, and she says, "Stephen, go to the light. Go to the light." Bless her heart, right? And he amazingly lifts his head from the coma, opens his eyes, and says, "I'm trying, Mom. I'm trying."
Wow.
Yeah.
That's great. That's great.
There's, great mix of stories, and the event, the audio is sort of woven together, but on our website, they're all there. They're all there. And we also do a lot on Facebook. I don't know if anyone out there is into Facebook but we have, we post a lot of stuff on Facebook. We try to stay pretty current with that. Not much at tweeting. Is that what you say? I don't tweet that well.
Yeah, I think, tweeting.
I don't tweet well. I mean, I have a Twitter account. I'm trying to get better with it, but that's not my go-to platform just yet.
Great. Well, you have a super vehicle here that I think, we're getting some great feedback. Trish says, this is really important work, Gina. Thank you. I know it's stirred up some conversation here about some books that people have read, Die Wise. There's a mention here of the 5 wishes. Yeah, so these are the types of things that kind of can come out of this as we begin to have these conversations. And, as I said, just the forum and the vehicle to allow people to put their toe in the water. And for those that are ready to jump in the pool, But again, I think it's the awareness, and then it reduces the fear. And you bring up a really great point. It's not just about dying, it's about living well now. And how does that fit into the fact that we die?
Right.
Yeah, pay attention to that. So
we have to not be afraid. We have to be willing to think about it and talk about it, and we need to learn how to do those things. So that's where the stories help, and then we'll all get there. We'll shift this paradigm away from fear and avoidance towards acceptance and engagement, and I know we will. There's a huge movement going on. It's not just us. I mean, there's a lot happening, and we're really so grateful to be a part of it. I am. Yeah. I wake up every day feeling very, very fortunate that this is the work that I get to do, and I get to read things like this and engage with people this way, and at the sites, and just in town, people hear what I'm doing, and they share their stories, and I think there's a way to engage more and more and more people, and I will work tirelessly to do that.
Great. Well, we need you in this movement that's happening here, and all our, folks participating tonight and those that are listening, it's just spreading and spreading and spreading. It's amazing, still amazing to me that when I first started these webinars back in January, that there were over 200 people that wanted to hear about, the stories of the dying from a hospice doctor. I mean, I couldn't believe it. I would have been happy to have 10 people on the call, and we had over 250. So there's a shift happening. And I think that, what you're doing is really just kind of continuing the momentum, and we know that, throw the pebble in the water and it kind of ripples out. And so this is great. Great.
Yeah.
So as we're kind of coming up to the end of our time, is there, what do you want to leave? Any parting thoughts? Anything you want to kind of share with the folks that are listening tonight, other than encourage them to go to the website and also to come to Somerville next week? Yeah. But is there, what else would you like to share?
Well, keep talking to each other. Keep sharing your stories with each other. They're so valuable, so important, and come to the event and go to the website. I want to say those things too. So I'm grateful again to be a part of what's happening in this movement, and I'm glad all of you are here. And I with great gratitude. I have great gratitude to all of you. Thank you.
Yes, well, thank you. And we have some nice, Gina says, I look forward to hearing more of the stories. Elizabeth says, wonderful project. It's all about life and love and living in the midst of dying. Great stories. Thank you, Nina. Elizabeth, yes, thank you. You're very welcome. We're so appreciative to have all of you here with us tonight. So great. Yeah. Well, thank you again, Nina. I look forward to being with you next weekend over in Somerville. And, cross your fingers, everyone. We're going to have fantastic weather. It's the fall now in England, so it should be beautiful. And, hopefully we'll have a lot of folks that will take advantage of the opportunities to just expand their awareness around this important thing. So again, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Take care.
All right. So for next month, everybody, we are moving our time a little bit earlier. So our next webinar will be October the 14th at 1 o'clock Eastern time, because my guest will be from the Netherlands. So being mindful of the time, we certainly don't want my guest, Marja Saas, to be having to be up at 2 in the morning over in the Netherlands. So we'll be doing the webinar in the early afternoon here. And it's called Second Chances. We don't always get them. And so Marja will share her story a little bit about getting a diagnosis of terminal cancer and pretty much being told to just go home and, put your affairs in order. This was about 10 years ago. And so really, and she's still here with us, obviously, and it's not through medical intervention that she is cancer-free. So she'll share her journey, her story, the transformations that have occurred, and, what living well means now. So, we'll look forward to that, and you'll all get the announcement about that as well. So that's October 14th at 1 o'clock. And again, thank you everyone for joining Nina and I tonight. It's been a real pleasure. I'm happy to be back doing the webinars, and like I said, we're set for the fall and actually booking into 2016. So as long as you'll continue to have an interest in these, we'll continue to do these. And so I appreciate everything. So have a great night, everyone, and we'll see you in October. Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care.